On this episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, I welcome the 44th Governor of Wisconsin, Jim Doyle, to the Buck and Honey's remote studios. Governor Doyle shares the story from his Wisconsin roots to Stanford University, the Peace Corps in Tunisia, Harvard Law, and a remarkable career in public service, including 2 terms as governor. You'll love Governor Doyle's life stories of leadership, service, and resilience. This will be a good one. Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What is up wherever you are, whatever you are doing? I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to another episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Decora. We are in the Buck and Honey's remote studios on the east side of our great capital city of Madison, Wisconsin. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube at Survive and Thrive 8791. You can follow the podcast and access to previous episodes on Facebook at Survive and Thrive 8791. The podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button wherever you listen to the show. Leave me a comment if you liked what you heard. If there's a topic or you know a guest who would love to tell their story, email me at tdecora@gmail.com. Our mission is to share stories and conversations that make you cry, laugh, and think, stimulating emotions, creating laughter, and inspiring the mind. A new episode will air on Monday and Thursday morning featuring a wide range of guests. The podcast will touch on many subjects such as, but not limited to, grief, loss of a loved one, recovery, professional setback, mental illness, success despite challenges, etc. Our guests will share how they learned to survive and thrive. This is our guest and episode intro, and today I have some royalty sitting next to me of sorts. According to the internet, and the internet is always right, correct, Governor?
Always right.
Always
if
right.
If I agree with it, it's right.
If you agree with it. Well, I don't need the internet. I don't need the World Wide Web. I don't need Alexa. I've got my wife, Sarah, and she's always right. According to an AI, artificial intelligence overview, while the odds of becoming governor of Wisconsin are influenced by numerous factors, including the incumbent's potential candidacy, the state's political environment, and the individual candidate's strengths and weaknesses, a specific numerical odd cannot be determined. Today, our guest became the 44th governor of our great state of Wisconsin. Today, I welcome Jim Doyle to the Buck and Honey's remote studios. Born in Washington, D.C., raised in Madison, Wisconsin, Jim attended Madison West High School and is a proud regent. After graduating from high school, Jim would take his talents to Stanford University before returning to and finishing at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. With college degree in hand, Jim and his wife Jessica would answer John F. Kennedy's call for public service by teaching in Tunisia as part of the Peace Corp. In 1972, he would earn his Juris Doctorate from Harvard Law School and begin a career that has spanned 7 decades. Today, I'm so glad you could join us, Governor Jim Doyle. What is up?
I'm glad to be here, Tim.
Wow. Yeah, we'll get to the story on how you and I met, but just before we started to set this thing up, we talked for probably 25 minutes, and you did about 23 minutes of the talking, telling these fascinating stories. And as I've told a couple of the guests that I've had on, you might have to come back again because there's more than just a couple of stories you've got.
Well, I hope you do these sometimes where you're the person being interviewed, because you've got a lot of great stories to tell too. So.
I hope so, because on the days that I don't have a guest, then they get me. So I've got to dig into the memory banks. I expected some Secret Service guys with you. I expected guys with earpieces. I expected a black SUV to pull up, and it was just you. None of that anymore?
None of that. If this was, a number of years ago, you would have seen all of that. You would have had somebody knock on your door the day before and check the place out. You would have, unfortunately, it's probably becoming even more necessary now with what's going on in the world. But I was very appreciative and thankful. I had very good security people. Well,
I was going to say that's just a unique world we're in. It's a cool thing to have that Ring doorbell that we have. So when you hit the doorbell, I can actually say hello and have you checked out before you come into my house. But we digress. How has the summer been going so far?
Summer's been very good. I mean, a little hot today, but no, it's been very good. Summer's always good in Madison.
Yeah, it's crazy. The last couple of days, it's, what did I see, 93, 94 temperature-wise, and then it feels like close to 100 now. Any plans for travel this summer?
we're going to do something I've done before, haven't done since I was governor, but we're just going to, at one point, take the trip up the river road, starting in the far southwest corner of Wisconsin, and go all the way up to past the Twin Cities and then the Squincoy River. And there are a lot of beautiful little towns and some fabulous state parks. So that's one of the things we're going to do. We'll probably spend some time in northern Wisconsin. That's sort of a typical summer for us.
I haven't done that trip, but I've been to a lot of those cities, starting maybe in Cassville, work your way up to Prairie du Chien, and then eventually get to La Crosse.
Yeah, it's beautiful country. And you may have done this, but if you go out on the river, you'll be out there and you think you're in the way it was, hundreds of years ago. No villages around, birds flying, eagles all over the place. It's a beautiful trip.
That's a good way to go.
Last summer we did something, I don't want to divert us, but which I had never done, was go around the north side of Lake Superior. Go into, up from Duluth and, go around the north, the Canadian side of Lake Superior. It's a fabulous trip. All the years I've lived here, I'd never done that, so.
I was going to say, have you been to every town that's incorporated in the state of Wisconsin?
Probably.
Yeah. Because there are still some places that we haven't been to, but we're trying to get to before we're pushing daisies. Before we get to your story, and there's a ton of them, I need to talk about our sponsors. So our sponsor, Buck and Honey's Restaurants, are a place that people can escape to. For me, it's a great escape from cooking dinner. Governor Doyle, do you cook?
You wouldn't want to even begin to eat anything I might cook. Fortunately, I'm married to a very good cook.
You're married to a very good cook. I love it. With their great food and drink menu, 5-star customer service, and a welcoming and vibrant atmosphere, people keep coming back with locations in Sun Prairie, Monona, Wanakee, and Mount Horeb. Most communities in the Dane County area, in and around Madison, Wisconsin, can get to a Buck and Honey's within 10 to 15 minutes. And I do a little drum roll here. It's acoustically sound, a little reverb. Somebody said, have you been to Buck and Honey's?
I have. I've been to the Wanakee Buck and Honey's. Had pizza. It was a great meal. Really nice atmosphere. So, yes.
It's good stuff. I mean, you said pizza. I love the pizza. I've been having that same recipe because the owner, Tom Anderson, is from Wisconsin Dells, my hometown. Oh. And his dad had that same pizza recipe, and I've been eating it since the mid-'80s, probably when you were just a little shaver.
Yeah, I was more than a little shaver in the 1980s.
On the podcast, our guests follow the format for sharing their story like this. In segment 1, we talk about what was it like, so Jim's history, what happened to get the governor on the podcast. And in segment 2, we talk about what happened and get into what it's like now. And we discuss the governor's 5 suggestions for thriving 7 decades. Segment 1, you were born in Washington, D.C., and you weren't there very long. You packed your bags up and came back. Go ahead and hit that.
Well, I'm a total Wisconsin family. My father was from Oshkosh and grew up there. My mother from Wausau. My mother was elected to the state assembly in the late 1940s when I was just born. She was the first woman ever from Dane County and one of the first ever elected in the state of Wisconsin, the state assembly. And she was the 4th generation of her family to serve in the state legislature. So the Washington, D.C. is just the fact that my father was in the Navy. He was in the Pacific for most of the war. He came back. He was called back in the Navy to his work before the war had been with the now Secretary of State, and they called him back out of the Navy. That's why I was born in Washington, D.C. My mother went there, and that's where I was born. But we lived there I have no memory. I lived there for 6 months. They always knew they were coming home. Wisconsin had always been their home.
You moved back to Madison, and I'm just always fascinated, but I hear kind of the same thing, and I want to hear your take on what was life like growing up in Madison in the 50s and 60s. I mean, my wife and I moved here from essentially the Dells in the 90s. I want to hear what life was like in the 50s and 60s.
Well, I bet you hear this from almost everybody you talk to. It was sort of the idyllic place. I grew up just by Vilas Park. It was a very different city. It was obviously much smaller. I think, if I remember, it was 95,000 people or something like that. So we're talking about a city that's now 3 to 4 times in a county that's more than that bigger. It was a very different world. It was very, the neighborhood I lived in was almost entirely Catholic and Jewish. The synagogue on Mound Street was right around the corner from us, so the observant Jewish families that couldn't drive on the Sabbath all lived in that neighborhood. And the Catholics tended to be either Italian, in which case they lived in what was Greenbush, which was about about 6 blocks from where I live, 6 or 7 blocks, or if you were German or Irish. So there were 2 Catholic schools that were 2 blocks from each other. One was St. Joe's at the corner of Regent and Park, and the other was St. James. St. James is still there. We'd play baseball and do everything together in the summer, and then when school started, the Italian kids went to St. Joe's, and the Irish, and largely Irish and German kids, went to St. James. So it was, Edgewood High. I went to West. I was one of the only Catholic kids that went to public schools. I think I was the only kid in my class that had 2 Catholic parents. There were a couple that had, that were mixed, but that had 2 Catholic parents that didn't go to Catholic schools. Both of my parents had gone to Catholic schools, and they were sort of set on me going to a public school. So so Edgewood in those days was really all Catholic, and so it was a really different world. But I will say this: it was a world that was changing, and it was idyllic. It was wonderful. We went to the park and played ball all day long. The city really looked out for kids. You got on the bus and went downtown even when you were 10 years old. So you can get pretty nostalgic about it. We were all kind of the same kid. Our parents were very much education, economic-wise, were very much the same. So it was a wonderful, wonderful place to grow up. But I had to grow up a second time when I kind of got older and had to go out in the world and realize it isn't all like it was on Campbell Street in 1960.
Tell us about your family. I know you touched on your mom and dad a little bit, but you also have some siblings.
I have 3 sisters. Unfortunately, one has since passed away. They're all lawyers. My father was a lawyer and then became a longtime federal judge.
Were you guys all born with gavels in the hand?
Well, almost. My father was who we all admired, and as we should have. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and I'm very thankful for that. Yeah, so we all, and my mother was very much ahead of her time, as I mentioned, her time in the legislature. Mm-hmm. So my sisters grew up in a way that they were sort of on the course that my mother had been on as well. But they were, I grew up in a really good family, and I appreciate that, and had wonderful parents. And, you talk about what you learn over the years now. I was just thinking about this in connection with this podcast. But so now I've come to an age where I really can appreciate 5 generations of my family: my grandparents, my parents, my own generation, my kids' parents, and my grandchildren. So that's 5 generations, and every single one of them, I've learned from. Even my youngest grandchildren, who are now, the youngest is in 6th grade, but they're just, you learn so much from them. So from my grandparents to my grandchildren, I've had a family that I just,
blessed with.
I was blessed with, yeah.
And if you stick around a little bit longer,
maybe
you might get that 6th generation.
I hope not for a little while from the point of view of my grandkids. But.
Yes. You have an amazing wife and 2 sons. Spin some yarns about that.
Well, I do. I'm married to Jessica Laird Doyle. Her uncle, Melvin Laird, was a renowned Wisconsin politician who went on to be the Secretary of Defense, with long-term member of Congress. Became the Secretary of Defense under President Nixon. Very strong Republican family. So our marriage, when we got married, was sort of as my mother would call it, a mixed marriage. And it was because it was a very strong Republican family and a very strong Democratic family. Fortunately, my wife's understood, has seen the light. And
yes.
So I would never be where I am without her. Mm-hmm. And I have 2 great, wonderful sons, Gus and Gabe. Both were adopted at infancy. And again, just talk about blessings. We've had blessed to have a multiracial family, which has made us all grow and understand, and I think see things a little differently. I've been blessed to have 2 really wonderful sons. And now they both have children, which has been a great part of it as well.
You attended Madison West High School class of 1963, and you're a proud regent. What were you involved in high school?
Pretty much everything, but mainly my number one thing was sports, and my number one thing was basketball. That's what I cared the most about. I guess Did
you play for Jim Stevens?
I played for Jim Stevens. Yes, all of my years were with Jim Stevens. So that was, I played, so sports was definitely very much on my mind all the time. But I was I did all the student activities and student government, and West was it was a really good place. I had great teachers, and I had my son Gus, who you mentioned. I was never as good as he was, and
he was good.
He was good, and he went to his sophomore, junior, and senior year. He went to the state tournament, and in his junior year, they won the state championship in a fabulous game, and he was good. So
gosh darn it, that had to be a 3 or 4 day trek to get to the field house back then.
Well,
or 3 to 4 minute car ride.
3 or 4 minutes, right? I mean, we were, where our house was, or Gus grew up, was in Westmoreland, part of Madison, right? So we were the closest school, obviously, to the field house. But those were magic times. In the state tournament in those days, the field house would be absolutely packed to the rafters. And I liked the Kohl Center, but I can get nostalgic about that crowded old field house.
After high school, and because Madison West produces some very academically strong, excellent, superior students, I guess that would also apply to you. So after high school, you would take your talents to Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. What was, other than the academics, was there any other lure to Stanford?
California. I mean, that was in the 60s. California was the place to be. Obviously the academics. I mean, it was a really still is a great school. I'd never the summer before I flew on a plane for I think the first time in my life, and I flew to California where my parents had some friends that were teaching at Stanford for the summer. So if you've been on the Stanford campus, you walk around in the palm trees and. For a kid from Madison, this looked like a dream world. So that's where I wanted to go.
It is on I've got this weird bucket list of things, but going and walking around on college campuses is one of the things I love doing wherever I go. But Stanford is on the bucket list to get there someday. You would return to Madison and finish your undergrad, and there's a little story behind this. You'd finish your undergrad at the University of Wisconsin. You would then answer President John F. Kennedy's call to public service and teach with your wife, Jessica, in Tunisia. Tell our listeners about why you had to come back and finish, not at Stanford, but at the University of Wisconsin.
Well, my wife and I, she's from Madison as well, and we decided in our junior year, I had known from when I was in high school, when Kennedy said the Peace Corps would be the greatest adventure any young American could have. So I had been set on that a long time, as had she, independently from me. So we were both sort of set on, even when we went to college, we were set on that's what we wanted to do. In those days, a man and woman could not go into the Peace Corps to the same place unless you were married. It's our version of a shotgun marriage, I guess, So we had to get married in order to be able to go into the Peace Corps together. So that's what we did. She was at Northwestern, I was at Stanford, and we came back to Madison for our senior year and graduated from Madison, which was great. As I think I said to you before the meeting, if one of my kids had come to me at that age, when we were 20 when we were telling our parents about this plan that we were going to leave these schools and transfer here, and I would have told them, you can't do it. I don't know if they would have listened to me. Here we are. We're married after all these years, so it worked out.
It worked out. I could see that conversation. You're going to do what? Gus, you're going to do what? So, all right, you then go to Tunisia, and it was an interesting trek for you to get to what is referred to as an oasis. I mean, I've heard of it. Yeah. There's water, and then you got to have water to live, so that's where you build a community. Talk about Tunisia and where in the heck that is and how you got there and what you did.
Tunisia is in North Africa. It is very close to the bottom of Italy, and then Sicily, and then Tunisia. So Tunisia is where Carthage was, for those who remember Rome fighting Carthage and the wars. That is where Tunisia is. So North Africa, ancient culture, really fascinating place. The Phoenicians had been through there. The Turks had ruled it for many years. The Arabs had come out of Saudi Arabia in the 600s to 700s and had conquered, taken over. It was a really fascinating place. We were assigned to an oasis, to a little village on an oasis well out into the Sahara Desert. And so an oasis is a place where there's springs, and we're talking about huge. It's not like in the movies where there are 3 little palm trees. There are thousands of palm trees. And it's in that area that you can grow crops and be able to survive. So a village grew up there, Tozer, which has now become kind of a chic, I don't know if chic's the right word, but a popular tourist site. But in those days it wasn't. It was a little village. And we taught in a brand new school that had been built. There was a leader of Tunisia at the time, Habib Bourguiba, who had really committed to education and it built schools in the most remote parts of the country. It was a boarding school. Many of these kids that we taught actually came out of the desert. They lived in desert caves, or they were Bedouins and moved through the desert, and they would come stay at the school. So it was obviously a very, very different experience for us in our life.
And you got there by, what'd you say, a train? And if you've seen National Geographic, it is everything that is what you see on a train. People hanging off on top, goats and chickens.
Yeah, it's a little
Doyles.
It was a little narrow gauge train, and it took again maybe went 200 miles, but it took us most of 10 hours to get there. Stopped for inexplicable reasons to us along the way, and people would get on and off. And then I was telling you, sort of the moment that encapsulated a lot of it is we came into the village, and we were probably the only English speakers within, 100
miles.
Yeah, 100 miles of there or something. So there was nobody there to greet us. It was just darker than anything I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, there were no electric lights. And a guy came along with a donkey cart, and we had been studying Arabic for this summer. We'd gone through an intense Arabic language training, but still we weren't, very conversational. Sort of through pointing and everything, he indicated that we should put our bags and everything, get on the back of the donkey cart, and that's what we did. I mean, we didn't know where he was taking us or where we were going to go, but but he was wonderful. He took us to the one kind of place you could stay overnight, and that was when we really realized that we weren't going to. We hopefully were going to add something and teach kids and so on, but we had a lot more learning to do than we had teaching to do about how to live there and to really understand what life was like.
I'm going to say that is totally cool, and that's going outside your comfort zone, which we'll talk a little bit about a little later. In 1972, you earn your Juris Doctorate from Harvard Law School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Obviously, there's all kinds of cool stuff because Cambridge is a suburb of Boston, and there's all kinds of stuff there. Earning a doctorate and a law degree is very, very cool, prestigious university. What were some of your favorite memories from your time in law school?
Well, part of our favorite were the sort of immediate when we got back from Tunisia. I can remember we had this little apartment, and there was a little grocery store. Almost, I mean, if you compared to a current modern American grocery store, this was more like a convenience store, but it was a grocery store in those days.
Was it a corner grocery store?
Yeah, it was a little bigger than a corner, but still that. And I can remember walking in there every day. We would shop every day because for 2 years that's what we had been trained to do in Tunisia. There was no refrigeration where we had lived, so every day we would go and pick out our meal and go and cook it. And then we realized, we really don't have to do this anymore, and we can shop once a week and have meals, and so there was that kind of readjustment. But Cambridge was a great place. It's a wonderful school, and obviously highly prestigious, but it's earned that. And Cambridge it was really our first sort of really big city life. When you say suburb, it means it's part of the Boston. It's part of the big metropolitan area of Boston, part of the city. So we lived a really major urban life, and my wife taught school. I went to law school, and we have made a lot of friends and worked really hard during those years. And I love going back to Boston now. It's a really great city.
Here's an interesting part of your history that I did not know, and we talked a little bit about it. You graduate with your law degree, and you would spend 2 to 3 years working kind of for the Navajo Nation in Chinle, Arizona. And that's unique because there's a book, and then there was a documentary on the high school basketball team, I want to say recently in the 2018-19, and it was, which I would encourage you to watch. But tell us about your time on the Navajo, in and around the Navajo Nation, and then you also worked with some of the Hopi. Talk about that.
Well, after law school, we really wanted to do another kind of Peace Corp thing, go to some place that was very different.
With electricity and plumbing?
Well, this had electricity and plumbing.
Sort of.
So we went to where we did, but there was much of the reservation that did not. We went to Chinle, Arizona, which is, everybody says it sounds like a Chinese word, but it's actually mouth of the canyon. There's a beautiful, beautiful canyon, Canyon de Chelly, that is there, that is, I think, the second biggest canyon in the United States outside of the Grand Canyon. Mm. And it's just it's a fascinating area. It has cliff dwellings and hieroglyph. It's an ancient history that has gone on there for thousands of years, right in that area. And I worked for a legal services office and provided legal services for people. And my clients were mostly Navajo, but for those who know the area, the Navajo Nation is huge. It's as big as West Virginia. It's by far the biggest native land area contiguous in the United States. Completely within it is the ancient dwellings of the Hopi tribe, who were there long before the Navajo came into that area. My clients were, many of them, very traditional Navajo or Hopi people, mostly Navajo. At that time, back in the 70s, if they were over 45 years of age, many of them would not speak much English, if any at all. So a lot of the work was done through an interpreter. And the language and the thought process is so much different than English. Somebody would come in and let's say they'd have been in an automobile accident or something. You'd ask, when did the accident happen? The interpreter would put the question to the person, and then there would be this long, long explanation. You will understand this, Tim. And then the interpreter would turn back to me and say, last Monday at 10 p.m. or something like that. And I'd say, later I'd say to the interviewer, what did he say? Well, he said, this person was of this clan, and they were going to this ceremony, and this was 4 days before the ceremony. And that's so a simple question that to me of when did it happen, I answer, my thought is 10 o'clock on Monday. But for many of my clients, when asked that question, it was a much bigger question about when it happened.
Well, you become so accepted in that particular area in the time that you were there, and there's a common language that you and I can speak wherever we go, or wherever we go in our 20s, 30s, and 40s, and that language was basketball. And you mentioned that at times you would go and barnstorm with one of the local teams, and you were playing a rather large number of games during the basketball season. I'm going to shut my big yapper. I want to hear your stories here. So Go ahead and talk about your language that you spoke with them.
Well, as you saw from the Netflix series about Chinle basketball, there are two things, rodeo and basketball. And basketball is really big. There'd be little schools that would be 40 miles off the paved road, and it would have a little gym. And they'd have their holiday tournament, and it would be the big thing that would happen, and teams would come in from around. The reservation's so big, they're sort of, you're in your region of the reservation, the teams would come in. And they were, I started with a team of mostly white guys because there were doctors, there were some other lawyers, there were doctors, there were teachers. But pretty quickly, the Navajo guys, not that I'm that great, but I was better than the other white guys that were there. And the Navajo guys sort of realized that I could play. And so one of the really good connections, you put it, the language for me, was that I played a lot with the Navajo team, the teams. And we would travel. We would be in 2 or 3 different tournaments on a weekend, and we'd have to get from Chinle to Window Rock. You know, we'd have a game at 10 in the morning in Chinle, and we'd have a game at 4 at night in Window Rock, and we would just be traveling around, piling out of the car as fast as we could, getting in there, playing basketball. But it is in the Navajo world at the time, and still largely true, is many Navajo people live very isolated. They live in hogans and family groupings far distant from each other, different than the Hopi who live in Pueblo villages. And if you'd see a typical Navajo homestead, you'd see a cinder block house, a hogan, a wood 8-sided dwelling, and then there'd always be an old hoop out there. And it would be just this plywood backboard and a hoop attached to it and no net. And these Navajo kids, because there wasn't a lot else to do, they'd sit there and shoot all the time. So I would play with these guys. They just were fabulous shooters, but nothing that anybody, you know, you big friend of Coach Ryan, he would never have taught shooting that way. But they were very good. It was a great way that I connected with a lot of good people.
In 1975, you would return to Madison and start your career in politics, a career that would eventually lead to the biggest seat in the state of Wisconsin. Because our listeners want to hear some more of your stories from your career, I need to talk about our sponsor one more time. Buck and Honeys has been with the Survive and Thrive 8791 crew since the beginning. With 4 locations in the Madison area, one is always near. People ask why Buck and Honeys. Owner Tom Anderson places a high priority on the mental health of his employees. He has a mental health professional available for them should they need support. I don't know how many businesses go above and beyond their EAP, Employee Assistance Program, but Buck and Honeys does. January 2003, Jim Doyle would become the 44th governor of our great state of Wisconsin. This is where our paths would kind of sort of cross in a unique and not so odd way to him and I, but maybe to the rest of you. You'll hear about that story in segment 2. So please stay tuned. Don't change that channel. You're not going to want to miss segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. We will be back.
If you, a loved one, or someone you know is experiencing a physical, mental, or emotional crisis, there is help and resources out there. Contact NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline, at 1-800-950-6264. This is a free service providing information, resource referrals, and support to people living with a mental illness, their family, providers, and the public. United Way 211 is available 24/7, 365 and offers free confidential assistance. They connect people with the local programs and services that can help. Dial 211. Emergency Crisis Services, dial 911. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, dial 988. To connect via web, chat, visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Along with those numbers, there is help. You just need to say 3 words. I need help. Now, back to the show.
We are back. Welcome back to segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Tim Decora. We are in the Buck and Honeys remote studios on the east side of our great capital city of Madison, Wisconsin. The podcast is where I feature guests who share their story in hopes of helping others who may be struggling with what life throws at them. Governor Jim Doyle is here today to share some stories about his professional career. His career has covered 7 decades, and it seems like there's no end in sight. He is here today to share how he has survived and thrived. Jim hopes the story will help inspire others to answer the call to public service. Since the show has a mental health component to it, and I guess I kind of find this fascinating a little bit that when we talked about, and I asked you before we set this whole thing up, was there any point in your life where there might have been some anxiety or some depression that maybe came in, especially even stepping into the state of Wisconsin's biggest seat, but you said no. And that doesn't surprise me because back a few years ago, there wasn't much talk of depression and anxiety like there is these days. And maybe people born in the 30s, 40s, 50s were better equipped to handle it, I think. And so maybe that's why you didn't have much. But you pointed to your time getting to Tunisia, and you got there, and there were some thoughts of, I mean, are we gonna be held ransom? Are we going to be sold on the market somewhere? Are we going to be chopped up into little pieces for soup later on? So there was some of that anxiety going into it, but you were able to get through it. Talk about kind of some thoughts that you had when you first got there.
Well, I think the most dominant thought that I had was, how do I learn quickly enough what I need to do? It wasn't just obvious where the food came from. It wasn't even obvious what food you ate. We ate camel from time to time. And I don't mean young, juicy camel. I mean the old camel that had fallen over because they couldn't work it anymore. I wouldn't call it anxiety, but it certainly was. We were up against, I will say this, when I've thought of this since we mentioned it, there's no doubt, and this was true of other Peace Corps volunteers' experience, I had a partner with me, and that made a huge difference. If I had been sitting there by myself with limited language abilities, trying to figure everything out, so really having a partner, having somebody help you through this. The other thing I wanted to say, as I've thought since we talked earlier about this, I certainly have seen the effects of people dealing with mental health. Dear friends of mine, one of my closest friends, many years ago committed suicide with depression. My son is a licensed counselor and deals with it all the time, my son Gabe. And as I spent my first, in elected office, my first 6 years were as the district attorney in Dane County, and so much of what we dealt with in juvenile courts, but much of what we dealt with in adult courts was mental health and substance abuse. It's one of my causes in life, and I don't want to sound too much like a goody-goody here, but if you could take alcohol out of our world, you would solve a lot of these issues. And it was overwhelming when I was sitting there as district attorney and just having these cases coming in at me, huge numbers, how many of them were related to good people doing really bad things, because often it was substance and particularly, I know we always blame it on other substances, but particularly alcohol and mental health issues. So it is, I appreciate the fact that you're really focused on this, and I've certainly in my career, I've been fortunate. I mean, I haven't dealt with anxiety or depression that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm just good at suppressing it, but I don't think I have. But I also know in the political world, I was fortunate. I won every election that I ran in, and that's fairly rare. And I tell young people who come to me now and say, I'd like to get into politics and elective office, I'll say, well, how do you handle defeat? How do you handle loss? Because it can be a crushing, I've seen it happen to people, it can be a crushing experience. You put your name out, even if it's not for governor, it's for city council, and the people living around you vote against you. That can be a really crushing experience. My father lost an election when I was a young kid, and he handled it well, but I remember him coming in and saying to me at night, he said, I've lost this, I hope I haven't done anything to embarrass myself. And I thought, you're a wonderful man, you haven't embarrassed yourself to me, but I could see how it was weighing on him, because it's his judgment that it's a judgment that other people are making about you. So I certainly have seen in political life, as in other competitive areas, business, and loss can be very hard for people that just don't know how to absorb it and aren't able to absorb it very well. For some, you can lose and it just rolls off their back and they're running again. And I'm thinking, one of the reasons maybe this is anxiety. I think one of my keys to winning my elections is I always was running scared. This may be my Irish background, but I was always assuming the worst was going to happen. And they'd tell me, no, the polls show that you're 10 points up, and I'd still think, no, this is going bad. And so there was certainly a lot of anxiety that would lead up to those judgment days. In politics, it's tough that way. You have these days of judgment, and the verdict comes in, and you either win or lose.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of things there. First, in Tunisia, when you had somebody to lean on, which was your wife then. But then you said you maybe mentioned that there were other Peace Corps workers or volunteers that came in. They were by themselves. So some of the anxiety might come from them being homesick. They're there for the very first time, and they up and their coping skill was they get back on the train and they go home. But you did not. You stayed there and you toughed it out with your wife. And we talked about this earlier. You started getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And maybe your thought process was, well, I need to learn how to speak the language better, or I need to get to the food line a little bit, food train or truck faster so we can make sure we eat. But you were doing all of those coping skills whether you knew it or not. You're elected governor in November of 2002, and you would be inaugurated January of 2003, becoming Wisconsin's 44th governor. Your inauguration ball would be at the Madison Marriott West, and that's where our paths cross. I'm going to tell my story, and hopefully everybody will hang on here, and it'll be quick. But my wife at the time, Sarah, was a contract lobbyist working for Petroleum Marketers of Wisconsin, and I was the plus one. She got invited and went to the ball, and I was the plus one. And we walk into this huge ballroom. Everybody's all decked out in three-piece suits or tuxedos. And the first person we run into is a family friend of mine, Jack Waterman. And Jack does exactly what he was thinking. He grabs Sarah, hey, we got to go and introduce you to the governor because you're going to be working with that guy and you got to lobby him and blah, 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 blah. And we're whisked along and he said, oh, hey, Timmy. And it's really Sarah that he wants to meet you. So we go over and this is Sarah and this is Governor Doyle, and you shake hands and then, oh yeah, by the way, this is Tim Decora, this is Sarah's husband. And all of a sudden you and I are talking what I think is like 15 or 20 minutes. My wife says it might have been like 7 or 8 minutes, but we're talking about that common language again. We're talking about basketball. And I think you must have remembered that I had played in the state tournament in '87. And then I didn't realize that you were Gus's dad. I don't know Gus personally, but I remember watching that '92 team was so much fun, and they weren't expected to win. And so we're talking about state basketball, and you're talking about you're still playing, and it was that common language of basketball that we spoke on, and that's how you and I kind of got to know one another.
Well, I will say that Jack is one of the really great citizens of, let's give him his props, one of the really great citizens of Wisconsin, and did a lot to, maybe as much as anybody, he and his brother too, and several others, but to really build the Dells up to what it is today. So you got introduced by exactly the right guy, and it was good to meet you, and I did remember you playing in the state tournament, and you know, I would always kind of notice the name Decora if it ever came up, and yeah, it was good meeting you. And that was obviously a wonderful time for me. I mean, that's when it was, you hadn't taken office, it was just about to take office the next day, I think, if I recall, and it was a good moment. What
was the whole process like leading up to your win over Scott McCallum? I know it's a long, lengthy process of running and campaigning, and kind of maybe hit a couple of highlights of that whole campaign trail.
I had been elected Attorney General of the state in 1990, so I had run and won 3 big statewide elections already. It wasn't new to me, but when you go from Attorney General, which is sort of the second biggest elected office we have statewide in Wisconsin, to governor, it's a step up. It takes more money. There's more pressure. There's a lot more attention. But I had been through it a number of times, so I was not a novice to it. I knew what I was in for. And the process is, you know, it's grueling, but it's important. I traveled constantly. You have to raise a lot of money. You really have to meet people. You have to understand what people are saying to you. But you also have to develop some pretty good themes about why you are running and what you're going to do when you become governor. Wisconsin, things have become so much more partisan than they were then, because, you know, I could attract 15-20% of the Republican vote would vote for a Democrat. And in the case of Tommy Thompson, when he was running, there would be Democrats that would vote for him. In fact, we would run at the same time when I was Attorney General, and I'd win by a big margin for Attorney General. He'd win by a big margin for governor. And that meant a lot of people were voting at the top of the ticket for one party, and then the next office down were voting for the other party. So I know we're living in a different time, and it's very difficult now to break through the partisan divide, but you could do it in those days. So a lot of my strategy was to convince Republicans and independents to vote for me. It wasn't just to get my team. You got to get your team to turn out. Most elections are pretty simple. You got to get your team to show up in big numbers, and then you've got to be able to go out and attract enough people from the other team so that you're going to win an election. There were some big issues at the time. One of them was Indian gaming, which had been sort of stumbling along, and the prior Governor McCallum had been Governor Thompson's lieutenant governor, and they had been having the tribes just have very small one-year compacts where they couldn't really ever invest or build bigger facilities. So that was a big issue at the time. Maybe the one that was most important to me was, as Attorney General, I had brought the big lawsuit against the tobacco companies, and we had recovered billions and billions of dollars that we were supposed to have in Wisconsin for years to come to help with the health care costs that come related to tobacco use. Governor McCallum and the legislature at the time had taken all of that money out into the future that was supposed to come in for the next 20 years. They had cashed it all in and filled in a budget hole for 1 year. So that was a big issue. Those are the kind of issues that were really there. The public schools always were big issues. I'm a big public school person, and
we thank you for that.
To me, they're the heart and soul. I'm the son of a teacher and the husband of a teacher, and I'm very thankful to all the teachers I've had. So the environment was a big issue. Those were the kind of issues that were critical, and I was fortunate enough to win.
You would lead the state of Wisconsin for 2 terms. I'm going to ask you not a politically related question here. What were 3 of your favorite moments, not politically related, in your time as governor?
One of them is just what I was. I was the 44th governor of Wisconsin.
Nobody else can say that.
Well, nobody can say it, but Barack Obama was the 44th president of the United States, and Hank Aaron, my favorite athlete of all time, was number 44, and he hit 44 home runs the year he was the most valuable player. But unrelated to Hank Aaron, I would just say one of the really great things was he came and campaigned, so it's sort of politically related, but he campaigned for me, and we spent several days traveling around the state of Wisconsin together, and the crowds would show up. I can't tell you the number of people who came up, and these would be in little white towns, in Wisconsin.
Pittsville, Wisconsin.
Yeah, they'd come in and they'd say, here's my, I named my son Henry after you. And Aaron, a lot of people, they're sports heroes. So when I was in grade school, the Milwaukee Braves were the king of the world, and he was the best, including also Eddie Matthews and Warren Spahn. It was a great team. But often you don't know who these sports heroes are, what kind of human beings they are. Hank Aaron turns out to be as good a human being as he was a baseball player. So that's one. Another, again, these are all kind of politically related, but certainly one of the real highlights was I was the second governor, I think, in the country to support Barack Obama. And was very much involved in that campaign. And on the night of the inauguration, during the day, they called and said that would I be willing to come to a smaller gathering at the White House after all of the big balls went on. So Jessica and I went to the big balls, and then at 1 o'clock at night, we were taken, the White House was for 4 blocks around, was all cordoned off, but we were taken through all the security, went into the East Room of the White House, and there were maybe about 40 people there who were there to greet Barack and Michelle Obama, who had not yet arrived, but they were coming from they have to go to all of these balls, and they were coming home to the White House for the first night ever to spend as President of the United States in the White House. And so we were there and got a chance to meet and talk for a while. It's like you thought you talked to me for all those minutes, but Obama came around and talked to everybody, and it was to me it was such a historic moment of what was happening in America right at that time. So that was certainly a major one of them. The others, I guess I just sort of put in a third category of, I can't tell you the number of non-political things that governors do. You're out on the road all the time, and you're meeting people all over the state. And you're meeting just extraordinary people that are doing really, really wonderful things. Once the election's over, at least for a couple of years, it's largely not political. It is when you're, the legislation and stuff. But much of what the governor does is to go and represent the state, but also express on behalf of the people of the state the appreciation for things that are done. So this is a very sad one, and I wouldn't call it a highlight, but it was one of the most important to me. I went over 100 funerals of soldiers that were. I was governor during wartime, and the National Guard, Wisconsin National Guard, of the 10,000 members, I think almost all of them at some point were deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan, and many of them were deployed 2 or 3 times in the 8 years that I was there. And between active military, reservists, and Guard, we had a lot of people that were killed, and I would go to every one of those funerals, and you would just, I would be there not just for myself, but to be there to show those families that the entire state of Wisconsin supported them and appreciated them and are thankful for what their sons and daughters had done. So that was certainly one of the most important and moving parts of it. And I met some wonderful people. We kept them going as a group. Many of them, when you talk about what mental health and challenges people have and the support needed, they would build their own support group.
The thing that stands out when I hear those stories of you talking to boots on the ground, people that you're talking to, and I mentioned Pittsville, Wisconsin, or you're in Phelps and you're talking with the people that are doing the work in the state that you're the manager of, you're the governor, and then you're standing shoulder to shoulder with these oftentimes parents and relatives of service members that come back and you're at their ceremony. Tells me that just how down to earth you are. So what is life like now for Governor Doyle? And when I mention the word retirement, do you even understand what that is?
I understand it about 25%. I mean, it's certainly nothing like being governor. I don't wake up and have a schedule all made up for me and didn't even know what was going to be on it, and then I just click off one thing after another. So those days are over. But it's been really wonderful for me. I mean, I've taught every year. I've been out. I teach a semester every one semester a year now at the University of Wisconsin. I've been of counsel at a law firm. I've been on some boards of some really great companies, Exact Sciences in Madison, Epic Systems, Fincantieri, Marinette Marine that builds Navy ships up in Marinette, Wisconsin. I served on a number of big not-for-profit foundations, the Kaiser Family Foundation and others. So again, I've been blessed with really good opportunities, and I stay pretty busy, and but I also have a lot more time now to spend with my family, to work out. I do hot yoga 3 times a week. I work out every day so I can, have time to play. I play golf in the good weather. So yeah, life is good.
This is where the subscribers, followers, and listeners take out the notebooks, pens, or pencils and jot some things down. Here are Governor Jim Doyle's 5 suggestions that have allowed him to survive and thrive a professional life that has spanned 7 decades with really no end in sight, but we'll see. Here's what we were able to glean off some things in a little conversation at the beginning, but I'm going to toss these in underhand softball style. You can hit a softball, can't you?
I hope so. I hope I haven't lost that. I do have a granddaughter who hit one off the wall yesterday in a tournament she's playing in.
So if you need a proxy, she can step in
she
for
can
you.
Do it.
Here are Governor Jim Doyle's 5 suggestions. We'll start with number 1, commitment to public service. And I'm going to have you hit these in about 60 seconds or less. So commitment to public service. Go ahead and hit that.
Well, I grew up in a family that was really devoted to public service, and it's been, I hope, sort of the center of much of my professional life. But one of the things I want to emphasize is you don't have to be governor of the state of Wisconsin or attorney general of Wisconsin to do public service. Everybody, and I see this as one of the things when I say I saw so much great stuff in Wisconsin, so many great people doing such wonderful work. People with full-time jobs find time to volunteer. They find time to help in a community group or in their church, or I think most of us are devoted in some ways to public service, and I really encourage it in people, and it's wonderful if you can have a career in it, as I did for much of my career, but it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't take having to get elected to elective office. There's a lot of really important work that's being done, and I've seen this in this state. It's really at the heart of who we are in Wisconsin.
Number 2, resiliency and adaptability. Go ahead and hit that.
I think those are a little bit, they go together. Obviously, you have to be able to be resilient, take what comes at you. And you certainly, it's true when you're governor, but it's true when you're in anything. What comes at you can be unexpected. It can come out of nowhere. It could be an illness in the family. It could be a job situation that changes dramatically. It's easy to say. It's hard to do, to just be able to dig down and appreciate the good things that you have and be grateful and be resilient and be able to take it. But one of the ways you are resilient is to be able to adapt. So things change. You have to be able to change with those. You know, for us, for parents, you can't handle your 16-year-old like you handled your 8-year-old. You know, they've grown up, they've changed. You have to be adaptable. So whether it's in your family or in your business, the best business people I know are people that can adapt when things come at them. They can see what needs to happen and they can make the changes, and they're not just stubborn, and they can do what they have to do.
Number 3, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Go ahead and hit that.
Well, to me, this is at the core of so many of the problems in this country, of people not really just being able to understand how the other person sees the world, where they come from, what their background is, how it's different from theirs. I hear in politics often so many people, and just in public life, lecturing other people how they have to, why does that person do this or that? Why? And a good example in education. From what I can tell, everybody believes that the greatest time of education that there ever was when they went to school. And it doesn't matter if it was in the 40s or the 50s or the 90s or the 2020s. It was, now when I went to school, this is how we did it. And that's how we should be doing it now. So I think a lot of our racial divisions in this country, a lot of the economic divisions come from people just not being able to understand, not being willing to put themselves in the other person's shoes and understand it. It's hard, even if it's somebody close to you, to put yourself in their shoes. But when you have cultural divisions, racial divisions, economic divisions, we have a lot of people telling other people how they're supposed to live their lives, and without appreciating how those other people see the world. I think these are lessons, when you talk about my life in the Navajo Nation or in Chinle, and certainly in politics, I've really had to, I learned this as a trial lawyer. When you're standing in front of a jury arguing a case, if you think they see the world the way you see it, you're going to lose that case. You have to be able to understand how they're looking at this, and that's something that I think is something so critical, is to be able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think we'd be much less divided right now than we are. Good point.
Number 4, taking care of your body.
Well, to me, this is really critical. I think we all know it. I've been fortunate that I don't have the greatest body, but I certainly work it out all the time. Bad eating habits, when you talk about some of the mental health issues that people confront, and anxiety and depression, that can be affected by what your diet is, by the kind of sleep you're getting, by the kind of exercise that you do. So people don't need to hear me lecture because they get lectured about it all the time. But I think it's really critical to try to live, keep your body clean, and to keep your body moving and active. And again, obviously, a lot of the other issues that we deal with health-wise relate to that.
And number 5, family and faith. Go ahead and hit that.
Well, to me, family is the most important. I think of who I am and why I am. My parents, for the first 20 years of my life, those two people were the ones that did more than anything else to shape who I am. And after marrying Jessica, she has been the person who has shaped who I am. Along the way, a couple of kids came along, and they've shaped who I am. But that's who I rely on. That's who I think about. That's who I try to live up to what they would expect of me. It is, you have to really rely on it. Faith is an interesting one to me, because faith is so many different things. And I think as I go along, I kind of believe in universal faith. I was raised in a very particular religion. That's when I grew up in the 50s in the Catholic Church, you were told this is the one way to see the world. And fortunately, much of the Catholic Church has changed, but other churches have as well. It's sort of another thing. It's like putting yourself in another person's shoes. When I lived in Tunisia, when I lived in Chinle, saw people with very different spiritual backgrounds that were very wonderful people with great spirituality. So it's important to understand that we're part of something bigger. We may not appreciate exactly what that is, and maybe we'll find out at the end, maybe we won't, but I think it's important to understand we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
What a great episode, and some of the things you shared that I did not know. I did not find some of the things you talked about. I went to the internet to do a little research, and I'm glad you shared some things that I just think are inspiring. Hopefully they inspire some of the listeners to do, but I'm so glad you could join the Survive and Thrive 8791 crew today. Your story and how you seem to thrive wherever you have gone has been really inspiring, and you had a best friend and then a spouse and wife there along with you. Behind every good man is a great woman, and
next to every good man. Next to every she's not behind me.
Your story reminds us all to have skills and tools in our toolbox when you had to live in the public eye for quite a long time, and you've obviously been able to do that successfully. And despite that, you have adapted and been resilient and have survived and thrived. Our call to action, Governor Jim Doyle just shared a story on what it's like to live a life of public service that has covered 7 decades. Here are Governor Doyle's suggestions that have helped him survive and thrive. Number 1, commitment to public service. Number 2, resilience and adaptability. Number 3, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Number 4, taking care of his body. And number 5, faith and family. As we close another great episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, are there any final thoughts, Governor Doyle?
Well, thank you, Tim. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for your podcast, and I know you really get into important issues with people, so thank you for having me.
I truly thank you for coming on. On our next episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, we will have another amazing guest in the Buck and Honey's remote studios who will share how they learn to survive and thrive. If you have a story to share or you know someone who does, please reach out to me at tdecora@gmail.com. Until next time, hang in there with whatever you happen to be going through, and with hard work, dedication, and determination, you can survive and thrive. Until next time, take care.